I'm delighted to say that we have, even in cyberspace, with us today, Glen Moyer. Is it Glen Moyer or Glen Moyer?
Moyer. I thought for years it was Moyer. I used to think I was French, and then I learned I'm Scott Irish, so it's not Moyer.
Anyway, well, Glen Moyer, welcome to cyberspace here at the Queen's Cup balloon race. Why don't I ask you to introduce yourself and explain your involvement with ballooning?
Wow, how much time do we have?
Go for it.
Yeah, well, for the last 22 years, I've been the editor of Ballooning Magazine, which is the official publication of the Balloon Federation of America here in the States. Prior to that, I was for several years editor of the now defunct Balloon Life magazine. Became a pilot in 1990. I retired from flying about 10 years ago because I've got terribly bad knees now. About 1985, I started, long before I was a pilot, I worked in radio and television and had the gift of gab, as you do, Robin. And so I started announcing balloon events. That turned into a part-time job that now has lasted 30 plus years. Next week, I'll be out in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
My 34th year on the microphone there. So, and just returned from the UK as commentator at Longleat's Sky Safari. So,
yeah, you're the world
gift of
expert
gab has gotten me around a bit.
Yeah, you say announcing. It's really, I think of it as commentating, and that's not an easy thing to do. So, I take my hat off to you, and well done. So, as for Albuquerque, I mean, to me, I've never been there, but I've been to plenty of other balloon meets. But I suppose we can say it's the largest balloon meet in the world in terms of numbers of balloons and pilots.
I think the correct term now is it's the largest annual balloon event, because I think Metz, Lorraine over in France, maybe gives them a run for the numbers occasionally, but it is definitely the largest annual ongoing event in the world, yes.
And how many balloons and pilots traditionally come along and enter?
Well, for the last many years, we've kind of held the number at about 550 hot air and gas balloons. Back in 2000, just prior to that, they started with the Millennium and all. We started this battle cry of 1,000 for 2,000, and they actually had 1,000 balloons there in 2000, and that proved to be totally unmanageable. So it was a great thing to do, but we thought, okay, we've done it. Let's don't do it again. And so now we hover usually around 550 is kind of the magic number.
We at the Queen's Cup, we invited up to 20 entrants, and I think the number at the moment is 14 for various reasons. Goodness knows what the British public would think if they saw 1,000 balloons floating over the countryside. But it's nice to think that it's an international balloon meet over there, isn't it, in Albuquerque?
It absolutely is. And of course, as you mentioned, the numbers of the Queen's Cup, the first balloon fiesta, what is now known as the first balloon fiesta, they invited 21 balloons, and because of weather, only 13 were able to show up. That was back in 1972. But it absolutely is an international event. And some years ago, I'd have to go back and look at a cheat sheet to tell you the exact year. One of the events that they've added through the years is what we call the Flight of the Nations. That usually, I believe, is on Wednesday morning at Fiesta, and that's an ascension where one balloon team from each of the participating countries launches flying their country's national flag. So it's a way for the Balloon Fiesta to honor and recognize the international participation that they have.
Well, I started in about, 1970 or something, and I've been immensely lucky making my living at it for 40 years plus. And I've flown in 30 different countries. And so it's wonderful to think that this sport of ours, of ballooning, is a global sport and people can fly anywhere. And
well, it truly is. We just wrapped up the Women's World Championship down under in Australia.
Yeah.
So it absolutely is a world event. And I've been blessed in my 40 plus years, thereabouts 35, 40 years in the sport, to have visited several different countries, been to Europe a number of times, and literally have balloon friends around the world, people I would never have met in my normal pursuit of life had it not been for being involved in the sport of ballooning. Yeah,
exactly. Now, thinking of competition, we know here in Britain, elsewhere we've described the description of balloon competition. What competitions are held at the Albuquerque balloon meet?
Well, competition at Albuquerque has evolved over the years. There have been years when it was very, very lighthearted. It in the last many years has become a little more serious nature. There are some significant prizes given away and cash awards, thousands of dollars, as a matter of fact, new cars, motorcycles, that sort of thing.
You can win a new car.
You have people have in the past in what was called the key grab event, where there is a pole out on the field with keys to a new car. We actually one year had a house grab. There was a faux chimney erected on the field, and the task was for the pilots to fly in, and if you got your marker in down into the chimney, you won the keys to a new house.
So let's explain to the people that aren't as familiar as we are. The balloonists will be invited to fly into this place where there's a key on a house or on a pole, and they'll fly what, 10 kilometers, and without being able to steer.
Yeah, it's usually a very short distance, especially in Albuquerque. I'm not good at doing kilometers to miles, but let's say they have to be a minimum usually of at least a mile away, and sometimes depending on wind direction, they'll end up going 4, perhaps 5 miles away. Yeah. Sometimes just 2 or 3. But the object is, yeah, go out, pick your own launch site, and then fly back to the field. And if you can get to where the flagpole or the chimney or whatever the target, a duck pond, a boat, whatever it might be, and get your marker in there, you know, you're going to win a prize.
Wonderful. And what numbers of crowds would be at the field witnessing that?
Tens of thousands. The first balloon fiesta, they expected a few hundred people to show, and they had somewhere between 10 and 20,000. Now, over the 9-day period of fiesta total, we've numbered in the 900, teetered around 1 million. There have been years past where we had like 1.2 million. So on any given day, there are literally tens of thousands of people on the field. It's huge. It's huge.
It's wonderful. We're very lucky having this sport. And a lot of our viewers won't be as familiar as we are, so we can certainly declare the sport as an immensely safe sport. I've always mischievously told my people that the most dangerous thing in ballooning is spilling the champagne when you land. So we leave that in the vehicle that follows us.
Yeah, I've always likened it and said I've always felt safer flying my balloon, even at an event with 20, 30, 500 balloons. I feel safer flying my balloon than I do driving on the highway to get to the event.
Yeah,
ballooning is incredibly safe. It's like the aircraft industry. When there is an accident, it's huge and it draws a lot of news attention because of its unusual nature. But when you think about the number of, even for example, in Albuquerque, there have been accidents. There have been occasions where a balloon has had an accident and 1 or 2 people perhaps get hurt. But when you think that there were 500 balloons that launched that day with 3, 4 people in each basket, you know, the numbers are minuscule. A couple of entries versus 1,000 or, you know, a couple of thousand people in the sky. It really is an incredibly safe sport. It's just that because of its nature, accidents draw a lot of attention.
And they go so slowly, luckily. As I get older, I like slow ballooning. But thinking of the vehicles, now, of course, you can't really fly anywhere without somebody following you in a vehicle. Otherwise, you'd be stuck right knows where. And so this year, we're sponsored by Audi, the motor car company. And so we're waving the flag for sustainability. And we've got some of the retrieve vehicles will be their E8 Electron, I think it's called, or Tron electric vehicle. Do you find many electric vehicles in America?
The government has launched a program to where we are moving to electric vehicles. They're not at this point what I would say common. As I mentioned, I've just returned from being in the UK, and I was driving a rental that was a hybrid. It was both electric and petrol, gasoline, as we would say over here. But we are trying to, as a nation, we're trying to move. As everyone is, to more sustainability and greener vehicles, electric vehicles. But this nation that's a whole political issue we probably don't want to get into, but we're very grounded in the petrochemical industry. We're a huge oil producer. So it's going to be a tough road, I think, for us.
That's the joy of ballooning. I've always said it's escapism. I love ballooning because you can leave all the hassle behind, all that politics, all your worries. It's a magic sport where you float away and drift off who knows where. And that's the wonderful thing. Somebody once asked me how to describe ballooning. And I think it was good old Don Cameron that actually had the answer that I always remember. He said, it's like ice cream. You've got to taste it.
I've never
And
heard that. I like that. I've always said it's like it's the closest you can be to an angel or a cloud without having your own wings,
yeah,
because you literally are just floating. And you're absolutely right. It is absolutely an escape. And the magical thing is you could launch from the same site 5 times in a row, and none of those flights would be the same. You would never see the same thing. You would never necessarily land in the same spot. Every flight would be different. And you never really know what is in front of you, what you're about to experience as you launch. And as you say, that's part of the romance of it.
It is. It's wonderful. I think I've logged about 4,000 hours up there in the sky in a laundry basket.
Wow.
I mean, that's over 40 years, and I've been very lucky to make my career at it. And so, of course, those people that are watching that don't know about ballooning, we all have a license. We have to pass all the exams, same exams as an airplane pilot, and insured and registered. And it's a wonderfully safe sport. And I mentioned Don Cameron earlier on. It was he that got me into ballooning in the very early days. And I suppose that's why his hometown of Bristol here in the south of England has become almost the centre of ballooning for Britain, because that's where they manufacture the balloons. And of course, the Bristol Balloon Fiesta is held there.
Yes.
And
Well,
Don
is sort of the equivalent to our Ed Yost. Ed Yost is credited, of course, with inventing the modern era hot air balloon, if you will. And Don, of course, did the same, built the first balloons there in the UK. And so they're very much integrated in that fashion as far as kind of founding the ballooning sport in their countries. You know, you talked about the retrieve a minute ago, and I think we don't want to miss the opportunity, especially for people who are maybe not balloonists yet. That's one of the great ways for people to get involved in the sport. You don't have to be a pilot. You don't have to own a balloon. You can hook up with a local balloonist in your area and volunteer to crew. And that can be an awful lot of fun. It's a great experience. It's a very social activity, and a great way to be involved in a sport that where you don't really have to make an investment at all, except for your time and volunteer energy.
Exactly. That's so true. That's how I got, really. And I went down to meet Don and had the first flight. And that's when I met a good friend, Tom Donnelly, dear old Tom, who set up Thunder Balloons. And so I left my job in computers and went to build balloons in London, ran away and joined the circus.
Yeah, my first balloon was a Thunder and Colt, so we have some commonality there.
There we are. So the history is wonderful. We could go on all day and all night talking about history. What about the weather? We in Britain, of course, we're experts at talking about the weather. Do you find that Albuquerque is usually favourable weather?
It generally is. We call it Chamber of Commerce weather because it's the type of weather you would advertise. This is perfect. Sadly, last year, of course, was the 50th Balloon Fiesta. It was a big, huge anniversary, and the weather was horrendous for most of the week, which is very unusual. Albuquerque is known, of course, for the box wind that allows pilots, basically, you launch, you fly out of the field and you climb slowly to altitude, and you can fly down here, and then you can climb and gain altitude, and the wind comes from the other direction. Then you can drop down and fly back here. And so you literally fly a box in the sky, and in many cases land back on the field where you launched from.
Yeah.
And that's a nature of the geography with the mountains and the valleys around Albuquerque. And so generally, yes, the weather is very favorable, but we've had bad weather days. There was a year, I think back in the late 80s, perhaps, when everyone awoke one morning to a surprise snowstorm. There was snow all over the place in Albuquerque. So it can be challenging, but generally it's very favorable.
That box demonstrates the showmanship in a lot of balloonists. I think that's why I have lasted so long. It's been the perfect means of self-expression for me. I think I'm a natural showman. Well, I know I am. I think I read a book once called The Aeronauts. And in the 19th century, of course, when ballooning, that was the golden era of ballooning, really.
Yeah.
All balloonists and balloonists, aviatrixes, the women as well, they were all showmen and showwomen, and it is a wonderful show for the crowd. And that's why we're trying to share as much of the Queen's Cup race as we can via the good old internet. And it's encouraging to think that a lot of people will, as you say, try and pursue the sport, get to know their local pilot. And we've got a website where people can follow the trackers. So good old Yellow Brick have given us all trackers. So each balloon, we can follow it from our comfortable armchairs and follow the race.
Well, and much like we have here in the US, we have the Balloon Federation of America. You have, of course, the BBAC, British Balloon and Airship Club, and then there are regional clubs across the country. So there's very much a way for people to get involved locally. It isn't something you have to think about doing on a national. It is a national, international sport as we've described, but there are means for people to get very much involved in their own local area, and especially I know there in the UK with the regional clubs that are then all affiliated with the BBAC.
Yeah. Enthusiasm's a wonderful thing. And of course, as part of this year's race, we've invited all the regional clubs to, to encourage their members to all have a grand fly out just to celebrate the sport of ballooning. And, now we're speaking before the races happened, but let's hope it did happen, that fly out. And we'll share pictures of it. We'll share stories. And this event, the Queen's Cup race, was held first. Well, we at the British Balloon Airship Club were invited to compete for this lovely trophy, the Queen's Cup. And it's an 18th century silver trophy, a big old silver trophy, which the Queen gave to the aviation industry, the Royal Aero Club Trust. They're a wonderful authority, and they generate bursaries for young aviators. So they have a lovely museum as well, and they've got a collection of all these cups. And so the first time we in the BBAC were invited to compete for it was 2013. And I've forgotten what I was going to say now. Oh yes, there was a fantastic initiative to get all the pilots to write their stories down and share their pictures. So we had a wonderful bound edition of all the stories, and it's a great education of exactly how ballooning happens, and particularly competition ballooning.
Yeah, I remember we ran a story on the Queen's Cup event in Ballooning magazine, because I was the editor way back in 2013. Actually started in 2001, and I remember that. Now, correct me, the Queen's Cup, it what's the word I'm looking for? It travels from one aerial what's again,
one aviation discipline, really. So it's
discipline. Thank you. Yes. Gliders. So the balloonists compete for it one year, and the next year perhaps gliders, and the next year sailplanes or parachutists or whatever different disciplines each year have the honor of competing for it. Is that how it works?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And I've always enjoyed competing, and so in 1984, at the end of every summer season in Britain, we used to get fed up with flying these short little flights out of a showground and down into a car park and go off for a cup of tea. And so at the end of the season, at the beginning of October, I threw the gauntlet down and I said to all my chums, come on, let's see who can fly the furthest. And that became the long jump competition. And it's been really popular ever since.
Well,
we try and fly as far as we can within the British Isles,
right?
Is what we're doing this time. And you've got to avoid air traffic control, and we're covered in controlled airspace in Britain. But the best flight was 338 miles.
Well, so as we are famous for in the States for copying the Brits, we copied you. And once you established the long jump, then the BFA said, the Brits are doing this thing that's kind of fun, and we now have our very own version of the long jump. And there are rules. You can only fly with, I think, 40 gallons of fuel, and it's a single flight, point A to point B, greatest distance. And it's an annual event. We have a flight window that's a few months open, and you have to make your flight during that time frame, sort of thing. But very much it was patterned after what you created there in the what was the British long jump. We now have the BFA long jump.
Yeah,
and it challenges pilots to really go out and challenge themselves to fly long distance. A lot of pilots, as you say, never do more than launch out of their back garden and fly 4 or 5 kilometers, and that's it. That's all they'll ever do.
Yeah, so that's perfect. That's enough for a lot of pilots.
Yeah,
it's nice to just encourage people just to get out of their comfort zone, really.
Exactly.
I found competition flying really useful, because as I flew bigger and bigger balloons, I really used that competition experience to use the winds to land in a nice, convenient field to land in. Because in Britain, some of the fields are very small. And
Yes.
it becomes a real art to choose a good field with no wires, no livestock, no crop. Look at all these
And
grey
access,
hairs.
and
Each one
access. Being able to find a way into the field, even that's just not surrounded by stone walls that you have over
exactly,
there.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking about hot air balloons, of course, mostly, but now, of course, in early October, you are hosting there in Albuquerque the annual Gordon Bennett Balloon Race, the annual long-distance gas balloon race with balloons filled with hydrogen. So I've been following that ever since I first learned about them, and I always expected to become a gas balloonist, but somehow I was happy enough with hot air balloon. But will you be there at the Gordon Bennett?
Yeah, same here. I've always wanted to fly a gas balloon because the idea of spending the night under the stars in a balloon to me is just so romantic, for lack of a better term. It's never happened, probably never will. But yeah, Albuquerque actually added balloons, a gas balloon race back in the early 80s. 1981, I think, was the first time. Then in 1995, we started what's known as the America's Challenge gas balloon race. And it is our own long distance gas race. And we've had pilots fly from Albuquerque almost to the eastern seaboard and northward well into Canada, covering some great distances. And that too is an international race. And for the U.S. gas balloonist, it serves as a qualifier to get into and represent the United States in the Gordon Bennett. But this is, I think, only the second time in recent history that the Gordon Bennett has been held here in the States. Albuquerque held it back in 93, which I think was after the year that David Levin of the States had won the race over in Europe. So this is quite a rare opportunity for us to host the Gordon Bennett, and really looking forward to it. I'm particularly looking forward to it because Deborah Day, now Deborah Scholes, from the will be part of Team UK. And I had the chance to meet her over at Longleat a few years ago. And of course, she's just back from the attempt with Mike on their attempt to fly the Atlantic, which sadly was not successful. But so I'm looking forward to seeing Deborah. And then I have gas balloon friends here in the States. So I know it's going to be a great fun event. And it's really a prestigious thing to roll into Balloon Fiesta. We're looking forward to it.
Great. Yes, fantastic. Well, Glenn, I think that's probably all the time we're allowed. So thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to meeting you when you're next over in the UK, or even if I come across the Atlantic to America.
There's still time to hop a plane and come over and see us next week.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Well, happy landings, blue skies, as they say. And I'll bid you farewell.